I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Chris Dunn. Chris is a landscape architect with more than 30 years of experience and a masterful body of work covering everything from large scale master plan communities down to the most detailed private and public institutions. The varied scale of his work is enormous. Uh, he's done municipal facilities, college campuses, resort and master plan communities all over the world, the United States, the Middle East, Asia. Um, Chris has owned and managed two that I know of, mid-sized, very highly regarded design firms, and was principal at EDAW prior to starting his own Dunn and Kiley. Uh, his story and the impact his great mentor has had on his life is, I believe, unique. And because of that, I think you'll see he is by far the most qualified person to speak on our subject this evening. Um, so I know we've all really been looking forward to hearing Chris's talk tonight. I very much have. So with that, let's welcome our speaker, Chris, and his talk titled Man is Nature, Dan Kiley's Love of Vermont. Chris.
Great. Thanks, Josh. Let's see. I grew up in Vermont and went to lived in the same town that Dan Kiley lived, and went to high school with a couple of his kids. He had 8 children, um, 9 years separating the youngest and the oldest. So there's a set of twins in there. He moved to Vermont in about 1950, and I'll sort of give you the overview of this. But I started working for Dan when he was my age. I'm 66. I started working with Dan in 1979, and and after working there for 6 months, I met his oldest daughter, who had moved back from a broken marriage in New Mexico, and she and I have been together ever since. So we've been married 40 years as of next month, and so I spent 25 years with Dan, 5 of them working for him, and then another 20 years just being part of the family and spending every Saturday evening having a cocktail with him and holidays and all of that. So I really, he truly was a mentor for me, not only while I was working for him, but until he passed away at age 92, I think. And he worked until he died, but he was really effective in his practice until he was about 87 years old. So I saw him practicing effectively for about 20 years, a little over 20 years. And so this is a kind of an overview of what this is a view of the area just south of where Dan lived. And what's wonderful about this is that you have the agricultural impact on the land use, the Lake Champlain, looking across the lake at New York State and seeing the Adirondacks mountains. And he just fell in love with this for a number of reasons. And so I'll walk you through that. And really, I think, reflects um, his design philosophy as well. So, Dan Kiley was really considered one of the top landscape architects, if not the top landscape architect of the 20th century. And I was just thinking about it while Josh, you and Charles were making introductions, and I always sort of the greatest generation, that book that Tom Brokaw wrote, and just talking to Kate, my wife, prior to this presentation, and kind of catching up a little bit on some of the family history, and the fact that Dan was born in 1912. So when you think about it, he lived through World War One, the Spanish flu, the influenza, World War II, the Great Depression, World War II, and then all the changes that I've seen in my life, Vietnam War and all these other things. And he grew up with this whole generation of architects that really felt they could do anything. And so I was able to see the 20th century, really starting in World War II, in Dan's experience, and then working with all these amazing architects. And I was, lucky enough to work with some of them. So um, Dan was had a number of publications. When I was in the office, I helped put together this first one on the left, process architecture, um, landscape design, which was the first issue, and then the second one came out looking at his later works, and then this Dan Kiley, the complete works of America's master landscape architect, it was a really great book on his work. Um, Dan had a interesting, just a career of working with Eero Saarinen on Dulles and on the winning competition for the Jefferson Expansion Memorial, what we call the St. Louis Arch. Um, the the- when I was studying in school before I even really met Dan, we were tasked with creating a model of an iconic landscape. So I created this model out of chipboard of the Oakland Museum, and it just gave me this amazing insight into Roche Dinkerloo's geometry, but then Dan's ability to soften that geometry with the landscape materials and the series of spaces that were created on this rooftop and became a really amazing public uh, asset for the city of Oakland. The Ford Foundation was really one of the first, if not the first, indoor atrium in an office building. Uh, this was during the Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, that whole era of ecological, um, you know, enlightenment. I think we just had trashed the natural environment, and this was a reaction to trying to prove what you could do. And that's really what Dan would always talk about, man is nature. And I think it was a reaction to the environmental movement where oftentimes, and this is sort of an outdated way of saying things, but of man's impact on the earth, and Dan's appreciation that, that we are part of nature and what we do can be natural. And so he always used that term, man is nature. And I think it was a reaction to some of the efforts going on in the 60s and 70s saying we have to stop everything and we have to let nature take over again. And that was Dan's reaction, like, no, man is nature. So we need to be respectful of that as well and understand how to impact, influence it. So Dan was very involved in the layout of the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, working with SOM. He was best friends with Nathaniel Owing, and Dan was the person you would call, and part of it was because he really understood architecture and was very sympathetic to it. And this was influenced by early travels to Europe, not only during World War II, but then going back afterwards and studying all the gardens of Lenote and all the other classical gardens of Europe. And but then applying, he was at Harvard as a special student when Walter Gropius was there. And was that right, Gropius, or it was at Mies? I think it was Gropius, right? Yeah. And so he and Garrett Ekbo and James Rose were classmates at Harvard, and they were being taught the Beaux-Arts sort of movement of of landscape architecture. And then in the studios next door to them, they were watching these amazing revolutionary sort of thinking about what architecture was, and Corbu, and the Living City, and all of this. And the three of them wrote a manifesto about how landscape architecture should be instrumental in creating the new world order, really, of architecture, and that landscape architecture should be an integral part of that. And so he was really a pioneer of integrating landscape and architecture together, and actually creating landscape architecture. And where he was thinking of trees not only as ornamentation, but as columns and canopy above, and spatial, really extending the architecture out into the landscape with a much bigger palette than what you could do with a building. So he was extending this out into the landscape. This is the air garden behind him, and so uh, he which was filled in, and now they've reopened it. And from what I understand, everything was intact. It was just filled in. So these have been restored, and we're getting back to understanding, this the beauty of the space. Um, they also did amazing work internationally. This is EPAD, which is the extent of Paris. So Paris had such strict zoning and preservation that they wanted to maintain the scale and the height of historic Paris. So what they did was, on axes um, with the city, they created a new um, Champs-Élysées, I guess, and but allowed much greater density and height to be built right outside of the city limits. And Dan was the landscape architect and planner for this entire extension of Paris. So this was a huge project, along with the Air Force Academy. But um, I think at the time this was really significant, because it was really the first time that for such a big new city, the landscape was integral into the planning of it. And for a while, it was very sterile, but as the density increased and the buildings built out, this has become a very uh, important part of Paris, and a great model for cities. And then Dan's also was amazing with gardens, and this he just had this amazing sense of proportion and scale and progression through space. And he always would say, I can, for me, designing a city is like designing a garden. It's really the same thing. It's just a different scale. And so he was always amazing. So I'll kind of step back and start at the beginning. Uh, Dan's grew up in Roxbury, Massachusetts, part of Boston, a suburb of Boston, which at the time was mostly Irish immigrants. And so he grew up in a very urban environment, and but he loved going out to his grandmother's farm, and being immersed in nature too. So he had that dichotomy of experiences of real gritty urban space, and then going out into nature. He sort of came of age during the Great Depression, and he would walk through the Arnold Arboretum on between where he lived and where he was going to high school. So that was another part of what he was seeing on a daily basis, and fell in love with plant materials. He just absolutely started memorizing all the plants, because of this arboretum, they were all tagged, and he learned the Latin names, and just had a lifelong love of plant material, which a lot of landscape architects, ironically, really don't know plant material, and oftentimes they really don't want to be involved in with plant material. They're more interested in hardscape and spatial creation. But Dan was able to integrate that. He was able to work with Warren Manning um, and got an unpaid internship with him. Warren had been a partner with Frank Lloyd, no, um, uh, the architect for the Central Park. Uh, I want to say Frank Lloyd Wright, but it's FLO Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted. And Warren had been a partner with the elder Olmsted. And then when he retired and his son and nephew took over, Warren left the practice and started his own practice. So, and he was a very famous landscape architect in Boston and was very environmentally focused as well, really early on. Um, and so this is Warren Manning up in the left hand, and then this picture that we took of Dan. Uh, I gave this presentation to a group in Vermont, and they were laughing about it. I was making a joke saying, "Look at Warren and Dan are wearing the same glasses, their heads at the same angle, and they have this kind of similar nose as well." And so when Dan was living in Boston and working for Manning, he became infatuated with skiing. This was before lift served skiing. So this is Tuckerman's Ravine at Mount Washington. So Dan would take the train or drive up to Franconia, New Hampshire on the weekends, and he started staying at a little bed and breakfast that were run by these two sisters. And one of them became Dan's wife, and they just loved going out in the wilderness and skiing and being outdoors all the time. So it's really fascinating part of Dan's heritage, and he in, instilled this in all 8 of his children as well. Um, so here's the Arnold Arboretum, and his walks through the arboretum and just falling in love with plant material and this love of nature as well. Um, he really wanted, because of his love of skiing, he really wanted to join the 10th Mountain Division that was training here during World War II. It was training here in Colorado. So he he wasn't enlisted, but he and his wife Ann drove out to Colorado and stopped in at Camp Hale and said, "Hey, I want to enlist." And they said, "No, no, we have plenty of people." So he kept on going to Seattle and ended up at Fort Belvoir, and where he did his training and became a member of the Army during World War II. And we don't really, nobody in the family really understands how this progression happened, but he became a member of the OSS, which was Wild Bill Donovan. And and Dan was in there with Ed Barnes and just a number of amazing architects. And Donovan really, he called it an army of gentlemen, or and he brought in all of these very well educated people, and he loved having graphics. So he brought in architects and landscape architects. And Dan, this was how Dan made uh, probably 50% of his early contacts in the architectural world was being part of the OSS. He also ended up becoming the architect of the Nuremberg courtroom. And these are photos that were taken by Jim Johnson, a great friend of best friends of Alan Gass. And Dan and Jim were best buddies in the army. And Dan's a captain here. Um, and lieutenant here. And so but Dan was the lead architect for this courtroom, which here's Dan here, here's Dan here, and Dan here. Um, and this upper right hand corner is Donovan with his map team. Um, but Dan would always talk about designing the space and um, how uh, important it was for the people facing trial to be in certain situation, and here's the trial going on. So, um, but and Dan had some crazy stories. So then after the war was over, he and Anne ended up in Washington, D.C. Uh, he worked for the U.S. Department of Housing, where he met Lou Kahn and a lot of the architects from OSS went into that as well before starting their own practices. So he lived there. My wife Kate was born there, and their second child was born at Walter Reed, and then they moved back to Franconia, and then in 1950 moved back to Vermont. But uh, Dan was very influenced. It's an interesting juxtaposition of these. And Vermont has this, of these geometric fields juxtaposed against the rolling topography of the land, and it's you see this in a lot of agricultural areas, but the mountains here are a little more dramatic than you'd find in the Midwest, and the juxtaposition is just really interesting. One of the things that Dan pointed out to me that he loved was this, what he called the browse line. And this is where the cows would be in the field, and this line was as far up as the heads would reach and their mouths would go. And they would create this great, very sharp line, and it's transition between the agricultural land and then the natural wood beyond. So you're starting to have this really cool um, geometric edge to nature, and similar with what we'd see with the carving out of cornfields and farm fields with the tree line, and then the maple um, sugar bushes of the maple trees planted for sugar mapling. And then this was a project I worked on with Dan after leaving his office. This is a farmhouse in upstate New York that I'll show you in a couple minutes as well. Uh, and then there's the nature by itself. And what Dan would love is just these monolithic growths of similar type trees that were growing there because of the water, the lack of wind, or in some instance, because there was wind, the soil type. And so you'd get these monocultures of trees growing in nature that, they're susceptible to dying off all at the same time, but there's a reason that they're all growing together. He just loved this kind of sense of these trees growing really tightly together and the spatial definition that they would give. And then the understory, based upon the amount of sun and moisture or lack of which, and your ability to move through this landscape and just see it in its beauty. So you'll see that, this is his, when I started working for him, he had an old farmhouse that the family had lived in, but then he had moved up the hill and built a new house, and we were working in the old farmhouse. But these are Lombardy poplars that he planted along the little farm alleyway going up to another barn. This is coming into his house, the driveway with the sugar maples planted alongside. And then there was a little meadow off to the left-hand side of this, and then full forest on the other side. And then this was the walk into his house. And he built this uh, sort of jogging but geometric raised boardwalk coming into the house, and the house is pretty big, and it's just fit right into the woods. And so he loved this sense of, just he'd always go like, oh, I want these trees to be like this, and real dense, and show some of that. So this was the office that we were working in. um this is a rendering that I had colored just to practice on, but of the Jefferson Expansion Memorial design that he had worked on. This is his wife, Anne, and Dan. Um, and Dan, when he was going out of town. Um, so his design philosophy that evolved from these influences that, as I said, design is the same no matter what the scale. City is the same as a garden. He was a genius with proportion and progression of space. And then his love of the land and how it impacted everything he did. Um, this is the Miller House, and these beautiful hedges. And he would always talk about this as being like a backstage of the side stage where the curtains kind of step back, but you have this space in between so that when you're between them, you can see all the way down, but there's a sense um, of edge, but it's permeable. And he also loved this sense of layering. So the big canopy of the trees, these column tree trunks, the ground plane that's just beautiful flat like like a carpet, and then these textures. And he wasn't big on flowers, and if you had flowers, it was a bonus, but that was not why you picked plants. It was more for their structure and their form and their texture. He's also amazing. This is the Chicago Institute of Art garden here on the upper left, John F. Kennedy Memorial Library, and upper right that I am pay that I worked on, um, Fountain Place down in Dallas, and the Dallas Museum of Art, which I also was very involved with. Um, I should say that Dan is Irish or was Irish, and because of that, I think because one of the reasons he liked Vermont so much was because it wasn't all that sunny. He really didn't like the sun. He was very fair, and he didn't like to get hot. And so you'll see in everything that he creates, there's a lot of trees, there's a lot of shade. If we go back one to the Dallas Museum of Art, he really didn't like Dallas. It was too hot for him, so he created these oasis in Dallas, and just was covered with shade. And so this is in Connecticut, private residence that he worked on for a number of years. But you love this dramatic and create these spaces that were embraced the surrounding landscape, but had this drama as well. And then there was always this place of shade where he could sit and have a cocktail and look out over the landscape. So this was kind of his really what he loved. John F. Kennedy Memorial Library. I think one of the things that is great about this is how he created this very strong separation between the road and maintaining this really strong axis on the building, and hiding effectively the cars that were parked behind. And he used native plant materials. This is all rugosa rose, which is the sea rose, and native grasses. And so he was really textual and contextual with his plant selection. So and I always felt that he was always creating rooms in the landscape and from one to the other, and these progression of experiences as well. Um, so I think his principles in this genius was he was always looking for the appropriate. Always talking about apt, which meant to him what's appropriate, and he was always looking for elegance and simplicity, the spatial development, bold forms, love of plants, layering, and texture. I This was a construction document that I did, um, working with him after I left his office for small residents in northern Vermont. And as you come off the public, it was a gravel road, but as you came in, this is about 100 feet. And he would always talk about decompression zone. Even if you're coming off of a gravel road, it'd be like, let's go through this decompression zone. These trees are big linden trees planted 15 feet apart on center. He's defined the space with an arborvitae hedge, and created a secondary portal here. And then you come into the parking court, and that axial relationship continues on through the garden. He's got this bosque of trees, another hedge. So you're in this very space one, space two. Once you get out of your car, you walk through into this axial relationship into, and this is a farmhouse. This is not a contemporary home at all, but he would create these spaces. And then because this is all enclosed, he had this belvedere, this overlook that was raised and penetrated through the hedge. So you'd walk out through there, and then all of a sudden the view would open up this way. And he also off of this deck as well, it looked off to the north. And so even in a very modest home, they spent a lot of money on this landscape, but he was always looking for, he was never compromising. He was never creating a soft landscape. You know, he always had a joke. There was a song, I don't know, in the 70s, I never promised you a rose garden. And he would always try to sing that, and he goes, I never promised you a rock garden. And so he was, he was a character. Um, and then I don't think he really articulated this as fractal geometry, but he did practice this and introduce it in some of his designs. And this is something that I've always been interested in because of that, is how do you create this sense, these proportioned spaces, these strong spaces in the landscape, but how do you break them down in a way that still has a strong spatial sense and definition, but also is sometimes a little bit softer. This is a project in Tampa that he did with Harry Wolf, and the landscape failed. This is what the landscape up in upper right hand corner and lower left looked like when it was first planted. It only had about 6 or 8 inches worth of soil beneath this. This was built on a podium, and there was not enough soil, and it wasn't taken care of either. So I mean, those two combined, it was destined for failure. But you can see he started with the Fibonacci series, and everything that was built came off of the building in the same grid that Harry Wolf had used. And then he broke it down really to an amazing degree. But it's all this fractal that continues to repeat and build upon itself. And it's probably there were two guys in the office at the time who had been recent Harvard grads. One was a guy named Greg Bleem, who has a practice in Charlottesville, Virginia, and very successful. Another guy who was really a genius, Peter Shout, who partnered with Doug Hare in Chicago, and it was Peter Shout for a long time, and then it was the two of them. And he passed away tragically. Had a heart attack and at a very young age. And this guy was a genius, and he did all the detailing of this and worked very closely with Dan. And but this was kind of a later part of it, one of his later works. This is a project that I had worked with on Dan, this farmhouse again, up in the north, in northern New York State. But as we come in, we have this defined courtyard, and we broke it down with this kind of fractal of white birch trees and ferns and vinca below it. And it just, there's a lot of strong geometry, but every once in a while, for a contrast point, we throw these in to add this texture to the landscape. So here are some projects that I have done on my own that have a huge Dan Kiley influence, and I'll just walk you through them. The first is the Opal residence. He was president and CEO of IBM at the time, and this was a summer home, they're really a summer home for he and his wife. Their children and grandchildren lived in Vermont, so and they had a big plant here. I got to know John very well and Charles as well. Uh, Dan was or Charles was working with Opal, and this is just typical of Dan, especially in his later years. He was probably 70, early 70s at the time, and I was off on my own. And Charles and John Opal invited Dan to come over, and Dan asked me to join him, so I came along. And while we were on the site, Dan looks at both Charles and John, and he goes, "You know, I've realized as I get older that I used to say, um, I used to say I don't like clients because they always make me compromise on what I want to do. Now I realize I just don't like people." And and so about 3 hours later, I get a call from John Opal saying, Chris, you were taking copious notes. We'd really like to work with you on this project. so, um, so I was able to work with these guys, and Josh and I were having this conversation last week that in this house, everything was based on a 7-inch grid, not only horizontal but vertically. And in the landscape, it worked out really, really well. We were able to create these walls that were 21 inches high in some instances, and 28 inches or 35 inches high in other places. And the steps and the 14-inch treads and 7-inch risers, and it just really worked well in the landscape. And we created this bosque of honey locusts that you park underneath, offset from the entrance into the garage. So there again, there's a strong auto court, and the tennis court was offset slightly from the house, so it had a true north-south orientation. And so this was a great project. And then later, the owner's wife was having trouble gardening. She really loved to garden, but she had MS, and so we created these planters for her so that she could sit on the uh, edge of the planters and followed Charles' grid and had a contrasting water feature element in there. This is that farm up in across the lake from Charlotte, Vermont, in Essex, New York. Farmhouse, drive coming in where that group of birch trees are. The alley going out to the barns set on a grid offset from each other, and then the head barn. We created this wonderful little terrace off of the edge of the farmhouse here, and this bosque of horse chestnuts, creating defining this front entryway into the barn. But the stonework, we found these great masons, and they had access to a closed old quarry, and so they hand quarried all of this stone, hand cut it, and we created this datum line that was even with the landscape on the west side, and then stepped everything down from this, and it turned out really well. We worked with Bill Pedersen on one of two private homes he did. This was for a partner at Goldman Sachs, and this was without Dan's involvement, but it we the client didn't want to have a lawnmower, and Bill Pedersen didn't want his house, the base of his house, uh, screened with any landscaping. So what we did was we brought in just big mats of blueberry from Maine, and these ferns that are popping up were just sort of volunteers that popped up through it. So we had a little group of birch trees, this mat of blueberries that turns this beautiful burgundy color in the fall. And, so it just was again this sense, and as we drove up the driveway, there was a big ledge here, and so we came up with this metaphor of mountain and forest. So the mountain was on the right-hand side, and we did a very precise drilling method and blasting method through the ledge, so that there was this architectural sort of vertical scrim going across it, and then the forest was on the south side, and so it just was it was again just really simple concept, but creating quite a rich environment. This is a project that working on with Josh right now. This is Tom's Diner on Colfax. Josh, you want to talk about this a little bit?
You can, Chris.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about it. There's a long history here.
Yeah.
And, so Josh came up with these sketch drawings that are, I don't know if I can can you see that blow up?
Yes.
Okay, so this was Josh's drawing, and um, the client was about to go with one of the bigger landscape design firms in Denver, and Josh's partner, Lynn Siegel, said, "Boy, you might want to talk to Chris about this because what you're drawing up, it's right up his alleyway, up his alley." So, anyways, Josh has we've been very true to the vision of what Josh has created. I don't know if anybody can see this drawing on the right, but this is the current rendering, and it's very, you know, very consistent with what Josh had done. And Tom's Diner, we decided to preserve these great junipers out front. We're going to sort of trim those up a little bit, but work with those. The sign will stay with a new name. These are some of Josh's hand sketches of what the character of this would be like, but it's very much a mid-century modernism from Palm Springs, but also, really fits into what Kiley was doing at the time as well. And this is a rendering of some of the fences that are being proposed and the separation between the outdoor cabanas and how this is going to be and the tree grid. So, Josh, if you want to,
Yeah, I mean, the grid was us sort of, it's a historic building. I think everybody on the call or in the meeting here is aware of the story, and the idea is that we're taking this Arme and Davis, California modern coffee shop, which kind of has this Ekbo landscape and this kind of funky fun thing, and celebrating that, but bringing it into something that's a little more upscale and a little more serious. And it's really this progression of these different rooms and utilizing plant material to inform space, uh, but respecting the original building, um, but still trying to say it's a little bit different. Um, I don't think anybody would think the whole thing was done in 1965, but it's certainly speaking a language that would be appropriate from the period.
what one of the interesting phases of Dan's career when he was in Washington D.C. and working for the um, Department of Housing, he was also starting to create his own practice, and he got a contract for a modernist community, Holland Hills, and so he was paid $10 for every landscape design he would do for each of the lots. So as the lots were being bought, he would go in and create these, and he experimented with every style you could imagine, and, it's just fascinating. It would make a great book, and, to assemble all of his drawings for just that one project because you could see this progression over time of him, trying to, replicate some of the current design trends of the day, and then eventually moving into his own style. And, but he just would crank these things out. Maybe he got $100 a design, I can't remember, but he would try to do one a day, and each one he tried to make different. And so, it's, This is a project up in northern Idaho, Schweitzer Mountain Ski Resort. We're working with an architect, very contemporary architect out of Portland, Skylab Architects, and they're designing this hotel that's being inserted into the kind of the edge of the little small village there. And so we were working with this whole fractal concept of trying to integrate nature into the site, and but at the same time maintain a grid and some structure to it as well, and some of these outdoor spaces that we're really excited about. This is a very Kylie. This was a plan that we did a couple of years, well, when Hickenlooper was governor, and he had this vision of connecting the state capitol with the city of Denver and Civic Center Park, and it was something that he had envisioned when he was mayor, and then when he got to the capitol, he got really excited about it. So Roxanne White, his chief of staff, hired myself and another guy that I'd worked with at EDA named Kales Givens. And Kales was a true planner. So he looked at the kind of overall um, state capitol complex. And then I focused on the design for around the state capitol. And one of the goals for us was to get rid of the cars around the state capitol. John really wanted to see this campus go over Lincoln. So you can see Lincoln down here, kind of the third of the way from the left goes underground. It doesn't really go underground. There's a cross section, and I think I've lost. There we go. This cross section here showing how Lincoln, this park would actually be like built out over Lincoln. Lincoln could drop down slightly. It's about a 3% drop down to the middle and then back up. The amazing thing is there's no utilities along Lincoln between 14th and Colfax, nothing. So it's just sand. We were able to get this to work out, tucked parking essentially underneath this new lawn. And what we were excited about was it finally gave this really magnificent building a generous plinth to sit upon, but there was a lot of grade to work out. And so this was the whole idea. But this is a, very Kylie-esque, where these spaces reflect the architecture, structure, and organization of the building into these events lawns that come out. And even though it's a sort of Beaux-Arts plan, it's structurally very much kind of a Kylie-esque as well. And then I think that's my last slide. And there's Dan Kiley, the way I remember him. And so I appreciate everybody staying on board.
Well, thank you, Chris. Uh, uh, you know what? We'll adjourn our meeting and open it up to questions.
Chris, I I have to say I see a lot where people talk, they see these, straight line designs, geometric designs, and they talk about how unnatural it is. You know, it seems we have this idea in our head that natural and organic design is soft and flowing, but when you showed that picture of the brow line and how sharp that was from the cows, I was like, that was great. That opened something totally new for me that I have get to think about from now on. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So, I don't know if this is a question or more of a statement, but since we are adjourned, we can chat, and I hope everyone just turns their mic off and he can ask Chris questions and comments. But I'll tell you, my I had seen Dan's work um, as a kid at the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. That's probably the first time I had ever experienced the work. And I remember that space, that courtyard, um, very, very vividly, and thinking that that was the neatest part of the whole building. And it really wasn't until uh, Charles had taken me to Columbus and I got to experience Saarinen's All Can Church and these parking rooms that, like, it was, I guess it would be this decompression, these series of decompression zones, and uh, this preparation for worship. And uh, just what an incredible landscape.
I see Ann Mullins is on here. Ann, have you experienced many Kiley
Hi.
landscapes?
Yeah, sorry I was late checking in. I'll have to check in with you later, see what I missed. Um, Interesting, like Josh, one of the first Kylie landscapes before I even knew it was one of his was the Art Institute of Chicago. And I grew up in Chicago. My mom loved it. We used to go down there all the time. And I I was found that rectilinear design, very organized, very I mean, I love the plant materials with the fact that you could kind of control them into this kind of finite design. I just was always fascinated with him. And then he was a good friend of Grant Jones, who I worked for. And so I met him a couple times and went to Harvard at one point, had a program and it was Kylie and James Rose and my
Expo.
Ekbo and one other. Who would the other be?
I don't know.
I can't remember, but so they had eh, yeah, it was like a weekend kind of symposium, and these guys were fascinating. And Kylie was great. He was so irreverent and so, and the whole thing about not really liking people very much. And so anyway, I have always, and I think, did you get me started? One of my favorite designs of his is the Dallas, the water gardens. Just when you,
Out place.
yeah, and all of a sudden you're seeing the inverse of water to landscape. Uh, so anyway, he's he's fabulous, wonderful,
I
wonderful.
have that on here.
Yeah, I saw you had that on there.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's just it's mind-boggling when you walk through here.
Yeah.
It's something like you'd find in ancient Persia or something.
Right. Yeah. It's just amazing. And there's cypress, right? Aren't there cypress trees?
Yes, bald cypress.
Yeah.
So
And then the Miller Garden too, that in Columbus, Indiana, is so elegant. And so anyway, thanks. Great, very
you're
fun to
welcome.
watch this.
Thanks for joining.
Oh yeah,
You're in Aspen, right? Are you a council person?
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Just finished yet another council meeting.
Okay.
I was a little late. So
Chris, when did he start using the honey locust?
When did Dan start using the honey locust? Oh, I mean, they're at Miller Garden. So it was pretty early on. But that's the great thing about Dan was he was always looking for the appropriate tree, and he loved honey locust. But as you can see in a lot of these gardens, he would use something completely different, whether it was hawthorn in the Chicago Art Institute or um, the bald cypress down in Dallas, and we were using live oaks here in the Dallas Museum of Art. And he did an amazing thing there. Jopan Hawley in South Texas is kind of a weed tree, and he used it in the tribal courtyard. And it's open to the sky, but it's enclosed by the rest of the building, and used it in a magnificent way. So he could see in plant material things that a lot of people wouldn't see, and he could understand how they would grow together and how they could be if they were managed. Um, oftentimes manicured. But he liked the wildness of them, but he'd like the you know, I had to pick out all these plant materials, and oftentimes it was not in a nursery. We'd have to go out into nature and find this stuff, and the trunks had to be straight, and they had to have a canopy, and so it was always a challenge to try to understand exactly what Dan wanted. Uh,
I have a question, Chris, about the Jefferson Memorial. My wife's from St. Louis, and unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get back there since the landscape was redone. How respectful of Dan's work there was it when they did it, or did they basically scrape and start again?
Yeah, it was not. Um, so it's hard to see, but this is a drawing that was in his office. And you can see that there's these just massive rows of trees, double, triple, quadruple rows, and creating these strong axial relationships with the arch. And it was determined, like Charles was saying, it was determined as though it was not natural. And so it was never implemented. And I think at one time recently, there was an effort to go back and review those plans. And I think some of it has been implemented by the National Park Service, but not to the extent that Dan was hoping it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept that they've finally bridged over from the city center to that, and I was seeing that reflected in the drawings you just showed for the Denver Capitol, and that would be so wonderful to get rid of that road.
It would solve so many problems.
I know.
Solve so many problems. But it was at the time it was $50 million. So they could pay for that out of the cannabis, probably 2 months worth of cannabis tax. But so
Hopefully it won't be shelved for too long.
I know.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Chris, whatever happened to the plan for the Capitol that you did?
State Capitol?
Yeah.
I think that honestly, I think John had political ambitions, obviously, and I don't think he wanted to be the guy that was known as trying to spend $50 million on a landscape. There's a fellow who's the head of Tobin. He had been with the state land board. Now he's in charge of essentially employees and facilities for the state. So he's really one of the highest ranked appointed, or I don't think he's appointed by the governor. I think has a more stable position. But I was talking to him the other day about healthy buildings, and he was saying that he really hopes that they can get rid of the automobiles around here. So I think Polis could be the guy to maybe pull it off. I don't think it's on his radar yet, but it might happen.
Huh. Do you think it would help Civic Center Park?
It would, because it would activate Lincoln Park down here against Broadway, which is just this island unto itself, and it doesn't have any real eyes on it. So by integrating the Capitol grounds down into Lincoln Park, and while preserving there's a number of different monuments down there that need to be preserved and some really mature trees. But this could handle all of that and uh, provide ADA accessibility up to the state capitol, provide secure parking for all the legislators underneath this the events lawn area, and get rid of the cars around the building. So it would solve many problems, but um, the political will needs to be there. And
Right.
Polis seems like he is the type that might be willing to take something like this on. Um,
Right.
I guess we just need to,
second term.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And we do have this, we've gotten addicted to the cannabis tax revenue, but it certainly could go to something like this.
I see Dwayne is on the call, and Dwayne's the fellow that's responsible for the restorations at the air gardens.
Oh, hi, Dwayne.
Hi. Nice talk. Enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. I was telling Josh that we're in the process of integrating our company with THK and Kevin Shanks, who I don't know if he's worked with you down there, but I think he had some involvement.
He did, as far as I know, he did one project for us. I work for the administration, so I don't necessarily get involved with all the projects, but I know he was involved with one.
Well, I look forward to getting to meet you at some point.
Yes, hopefully we can all get together and visit the air garden when it's completed, probably June or so. We're about 60% done with the air garden. Obviously, the winter weather has slowed us down a bit. There's still a lot of concrete work that has to go because all the sidewalks had to be rebuilt. All the tanks were still there, so we're able to uncover those. We had actually put in the fountains at the north and the south end of the air garden back in the mid '90s, and ever since then, the Academy has been interested in restoring the air gardens back to the way they were. Um, Obviously, the issue was finding money. 'Cause obviously, it would be difficult for us to justify Department of Defense dollars to build an $8 million landscape project. So fortunately, we had 3 graduating classes from the Academy come forward and committed to funding the restoration of the air garden. And so that's what's underway now. We we do have to have part of the air garden actually up and operational by the time the seniors take their finals. So when we put the fountains back in at the north and the south end, the cadets made it a tradition that as soon as they take their last final, they run out of the building and jump into the pool. So we want to make sure that we have at least one pool up and operational by mid-May. The rest of it to follow probably in June, possibly July.
And Dan was always talking about there's a piece of ledge that remains in the quad that he said during the planning and design there was a huge pressure to get rid of that, and Dan felt like it was this beautiful foil to the geometry of everything else that's going on in there. And I've talked to some of the graduates, and they've always said that that's been kind of a memorable part of their experience.
Are you talking about Spirit Hill?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the Academy is all about positive and negative space. You can see that in the architecture, but you can also see that in the landscape architecture. So there was a ravine that originally came up from the south of the cadet area into the middle of the cadet area. And Dan Kiley considered that a negative space, not in a negative way, but because it actually recessed into the ground, it was a negative space. And he didn't want that culminating in the cadet area without a counterpart to it. So Spirit Hill was the positive space to the negative space that the ravine created. So Spirit Hill is still there. And there's all kinds of folklore about why it is there, which is kind of comical in some ways. But it's still there.
It's great.
And the other thing that we have done is obviously the air garden was completed according to Dan Kiley's design. But the thing that was just as major as the air garden that did not get completed, it was a budget cut, was the landscaping in the courtyards of the cadet dorms. And we just a few years ago, actually now, we renovated Vandenberg Hall, which is our one huge dorm. It has 2,500 cadets in that dorm and several courtyards in a row. And we took Dan Kiley's original design, which was a serpentine kind of a layout of sidewalks and landscaping where every courtyard was different, but every courtyard flowed into the other. And we did an adaptive design that used his principles when we redid Vandenberg Hall. And right now we're under design with Saigon Hall, which is our second dorm and has courtyards in it. And we're basically looking at doing a similar kind of a design based on Dan Kiley's original ideas for the dorm courtyards there.
Now, Dwayne, I remember one of the changes you mentioned was that there was the thought to not do the pools blue, but to do them black.
Right. So when we put the fountains back in the mid 90s, we actually Skidmore and Merrill did the design for that, and they asked Dan Kiley to come on as a consultant with the restoration of those fountains. And so that happened, obviously. And one of the comments from Dan Kiley at that point was that he wished he would have used a darker color for the fountain pools and all the reflecting pools so that they would truly reflect better during the daytime. And so we are continuing with that thought. And we're, instead of using a blue, which actually looked like a large assembly of swimming pools, we're using a dark material in the pools. And we did a test on that actually, and it does reflect really great. So we're looking forward to summertime when all the rest of the reflecting pools and the fountains will have that same coating and all be operational.
It's interesting in
Yeah.
this photo here on the upper left, it does kind of look like it is darker, but it's probably the angle that it's taken.
Well, that rendering was actually done for our current design. So there was a series of renderings that we had done so people could and donors could actually see what was going on. And this is one of those renderings. And one of the key things that the Academy wanted to restore the air garden, like I mentioned, since the mid 1990s, but there were some significant issues with why everything got filled in originally back in the actually in the early 70s. And one of the things the Academy administration said was, we'd like to be able to restore this back to what it was because it was so beautiful. But they challenged us to fix the problems on why it got filled in originally. And so we were able to successfully address those things, and we got the go ahead to do it, which is great. Something that's been something I've wanted to do for many, many years and didn't know if I'd actually be around to see it. So it's great that that it's happening now.
Dwayne, I have some photos that I took what I would do when I was working for Dan is he'd always, when downtime, he would always want me to organize his slide files. So I would go through those slide files, and there were certain iconic projects he had that I would take the slides out, have them duplicated, keep the duplication, put the original back in his file. So I've got quite a few of his original slides of this of the campus that I don't know if has been distributed before, but um, and then so there's a story, crazy story. So Dan donated all his documentation, plans and documentation to Harvard. They did it in 2 batches. They did everything up through the early 70s and got that down to Harvard. And then from 70 until essentially the end of his career, they were boxing up everything else. And one of the sons was in charge of it. And this is a, kind of family story. So he was dragging his feet to get it to Harvard. It had been all praised, and Harvard had come up and inventoried everything, and it was all boxed up, ready to go. Well, Dan died first, and then about a year later, his wife Ann died, and it was about a week after she had died, and the family, all 8 kids, were together and sort of going through the house and divvying up who was going to take what. And some of the kids took stuff out of the house. All of his archives were in the house. That night, it was hit by lightning and burned to the ground. There's nothing left, nothing. And so all of his archives from the probably the mid 70s on were burned up, and all of his slides. So it was, all the drawings that he did for the Air Force Academy are still probably in Harvard's archives, and you probably have access to those, Dwayne. But it was just, it was an act of God. It was like, and the kids were all like, Dan and Ann are probably up in heaven saying, "Hey, that's great. Now we can start all over again." But um, it was just really kind of a tragic event.
Yeah. Actually, we have all the original linens.
Oh, good, great.
We have all the linens from the entire site development and design of the academy, and they are really something. And it's not Mylar, it's not clear. What's clear print? Is that the paper version? It's all actually linen.
Yeah.
It's fantastic drawings. And I will say something based on your rendering there. If anybody's looking at buying a honey locust in the near future, we've probably bought every honey locust in the entire state. There's almost 400 honey locusts in this project, and we're actually a few trees short still. So,
Well,
if you're looking for honey locust, good luck.
we've pre-bought the honey locust for we have 24 that we pre-bought and expect to have them ready in either this fall or a year from now.
So I got another question, but it's actually for Dwayne. I thought one of the problems with that garden was that the honey locust wasn't very good in that environment, whether the altitude or so close to the mountains. But they will do all right. Have you had to make some changes in the design?
We did make some changes in the design, and you're actually right. Creating the right environment at the altitude that the cadet area is, which is 7,200 feet, is really critical. One of the problems with the original design that we had to resolve was that where the honey locusts are, those areas are recessed down. So the surface in those recessed areas is at the same level as the water in the pools. So essentially, it created this raised white walkway that went through, gridded walkway that went through the whole air garden. But there was sod in there. So that meant that you had to provide the sod enough water to be able to keep the sod green, which is too much water for the honey locusts. And then on top of that, our groundskeepers would have to drag their lawnmowers down in there and their weed whackers and they run into the trees and they'd weed whack the grass around the trees and damage the bark. And all those things contributed to the demise of the honey locust. So it was like, we did everything that we could to kill the trees. And so going back, what we're doing is we're recessing those areas back down, but instead of putting sod in there, we're putting a gravel mulch in. And so we can fine tune the irrigation to support the trees versus the sod. And then it also eliminates us having to go down there and do mowing and weed whacking. So we think that the honey locust is the right tree. We've had Colorado State University down talking to us. We've had arborists from Denver and Colorado Springs all looking at the trees over the many years we've been trying to plan for this. And in order to get the character of what Dan Kiley had originally wanted for the air garden, really the honey locust is about the only tree that's going to work. And it does work well at a high altitude. We have honey locust trees in front of Vandenberg Hall, which is our the one big dorm. And those trees are 60 years old and they are still doing well. So we know that those trees will survive. It just depends on how well you provide an environment for them so that they can survive.
That's
what-
that's great because they're real quick. Were the original ones, excuse me, the original ones thorned or thornless?
Thornless.
Oh, okay.
And one of the other problems was that when they actually filled in those areas where the trees are also along with the pools. So that obviously put the root ball down a lot farther than it should have been. And some trees survived, some trees didn't. So like I say, those trees were fighting and we were not helping them out any. So I think we've got an environment that will work. The other problem that we had with the air garden was that all of these pools are 30 inches deep. And they're all interconnected via an underground pump room, which is still there. The original pump room is still there at the north end. So that meant that if you had to maintain any of those fountains or reflecting pools, the entire system had to be drained down.
Wow.
And when you do that, it was overwhelming our wastewater treatment plant. Plus, that's a lot of water to send to a wastewater treatment plant. Although at the academy, we reuse all of our water. We don't release a single drop of wastewater off the academy. So it wasn't wasted water, but it was an issue. So we basically zoned all those pools now, so you can just take them down in certain areas and maintain the pools that way without having to drain everything down.
One thing that we're doing at Tom's Diner, because that whole area has been forever, um, as long as any of us have been alive, a surface parking lot. So we're ripping that up and we're putting in a stratovault, 2 layers of stratovault, pretty much throughout the whole garden. And so that these trees will have uncompacted root zone growth area. And so we're really excited about that. And I think that these trees, from the studies we've seen, the trees grow almost 3 times faster than trees that are planted in normal soil. So I don't know if that's anything that, it, and if Dan had used that in the Tampa project, a system like that, those trees probably still would have been alive.
Right. We're in the air garden. We're using, excuse me, I got a chest cold, but we're using an amended soil for all of the recessed tree areas. You wouldn't believe how much dirt we've had to take back out of the air gardens, digging out the pools and digging out the recessed areas where the trees are. It's been an incredible convoy of dump trucks and front end loaders early on in the project.
Well, we look forward to seeing it. It's that would be a great presentation just to show the progression of and the whole story of how this has been restored and all the changes you've made as well.
And I'll say also, one of the problems that also arose from the original design was from what we heard from the early classes, was that nobody ever went out into the air gardens and enjoyed the air gardens. They either run through them really quick to get where they were going, or they go around the air gardens. and we really want to make the air gardens a place for people to be. So as part of that, one of the things, we're gonna have 2 outdoor classrooms, which are gonna be full Wi-Fi and powered at 2 locations in the air gardens, basically recessed into the tree bosques. And we're gonna put in some additional benches out there, so it's gonna really promote people to actually go out into the air gardens. And things are not quite as strict at the academy as they were when it first opened up and when the air gardens were there originally. So it's going to allow us to actually create this as a people place to be, which I think is going to be really great.
Why didn't they use it, Dwayne?
Uh,
They harsh.
Basically, when the academy opened up, it was a very, very strict place. So one of the things that the cadets developed was that, as my understanding, I won't stand behind this as being fact, but they said that if anybody was able to make it through the air garden twice without getting caught, they became an ace. So I'm not sure exactly how you can get through the air garden twice without somebody seeing you do it so that you could prove that you did it. But it was just not something that was looked on except for upperclassmen. Upperclassmen could go out there, but that was it. Now we want everybody to go out and enjoy it. And certainly when we have open events, after we get done with COVID, with graduation and parents weekend and those things where the entire cadet area opens up to people, we want to get the air gardens done so that we can actually get people down there and walking through the air gardens and enjoying it.
What was Kylie's involvement with the rest of that site?
The courtyards and the dorms, the overall concept for the formal landscaping around the cadet area. One of the interesting things was I found an original landscape drawing of the cadet area, and I decided to color it in with my colored pencils. And so all the roofs of the buildings were gray, the plazas were the brown, and the formal landscaping was the green. And it was really interesting because the way that came out, it was 1/3 building, 1/3 plaza, and 1/3 formal landscaping. So I don't know if that was planned, but that's what actually happened. Uh, so he did the landscaping around the periphery. The entranceway to the cadet area was his. And the only other thing that we can really find and it was just some sketches that he did was the landscaping for the I-25 interchanges for the north and the south gate that did not get built. And in case just to make sure everybody understands, I-25 as it passes by the academy is actually on academy property. We own the land on the other side of the highway. And the idea was that as you drive north and south on I-25, you have open space on both sides of the highway versus Air Force Academy on one side and strip development on the other side, which has really been an advantage to us now because back when that was planned, Color Springs was way down the road. So now that Color Springs has grown so much, we've really reaped the benefits of that planning. But he did landscaping for the 2 interchanges.
Chris, what was Dan's favorite drink?
So he loved red wine. He loved any wine, but he liked red wine, but he loved gin martinis and gin and tonics. But he would make these killer gin and tonics that most people that went to visit him would always talk about these gin and tonics because they would just knock you on your butt. And uh, but he actually in one of those articles that I wrote, he would always talk about the martini garden and using lemon scented thyme uh, beneath the stepping stones that you'd walk and you'd drink your dried martini and you'd step on the lemon scented thyme and that would take the place of the lemon twist. So yeah, uh, he did like his gin. And so And he's an interesting guy. Dwayne, that was one of the things that he would always encourage any client to do, was buy as much land as they could around their property to prevent that exact same thing from happening, or having neighbors or anything. He was always an advocate of just having more land. And, so I could imagine him being part of that discussion early on about how that needed to be preserved. Um,
Yeah, actually, I-25 was built at the same time that the academy was built, and it was actually rerouted to some extent to accommodate the idea of going through the academy and that being open space land on both sides.
yeah, you can see that from this air photo in the lower left, how the highway
Right.
goes.
Right. You'd never know that's on our property without
Yeah.
actually somebody telling you. But we respond to all the traffic accidents and everything on the highway, the 6 miles of highway that's on our property.
Oh, wow.
Chris, what can you share about NCAR?
Well, NCAR, so that was Pei and Kylie, and Kate and I went there with him, um, uh, and drove up, and we stopped along the way a number of times, and then we walked through the campus before it was the landscape was redone. And I think Dan, I think what he saw in the middle of that building, where the courtyard was, um, we use this analogy a lot when we're working with resorts, is that you can either have a a landscape that's based upon hardscape with pockets of pavement, or you can have a landscape that's based upon nature with inserts of hardscape through it. And so that project I was showing you up in northern Idaho, that was the attitude, was we were going to try to introduce, reintroduce nature, and then bring these pockets of pavement through nature. Um, and So at NCAR, it was seen as hardscape with these grass panels and a couple of trees that were cut out of this hardscape that was part of Pay's, podium, where the buildings were. There's this flat podium that the buildings were popping up out of, and so it was. In some instances, Kylie's really accepted nature as the dominant element. In others, he's realized that it's more of an urban environment, and you create these inserts, and that was what NCAR was. He camped out there with Pay, and the architect that Len worked for too was part of the team. And so Len and I were sharing stories of what we'd heard from our mentors about the planning of that. And so Kylie came out with Pay, and there was a group of them, and they walked the road alignment before there was anything there, and talked again about preserving the sense of arrival, and how that all how that all worked. There wasn't whole heck of a lot of landscape up there, but I still feel that Kylie, and this was, that was one of the first projects that Pay did on his own. Um, and so Dan was really good friends with him throughout his career, and did a lot of his work.
Did Kylie have anything to do with Mile High Center here in town?
I don't think so.
A tower?
No, I don't think so. If it was just maybe consulting, but um, Dan really didn't like Colorado that much because it was too sunny, too hot for him. And when he was coming out in the 50s, the hotels weren't up to his standards. He liked the New York and Chicago hotels, and um, he and Harry Weiss were best. Those guys got in a lot of trouble together. Those two were just, they were horrible when they got together. They would get drunk. He came back from a trip with Harry Weiss. They were doing Fountain Place. It was supposed to be a Harry Weiss building and a IMP building, and the garden was between the two of them. And I was I was there at the office when working there, and he came back and he looked like he had been mugged. I mean, he was completely beat up. And the story was that they got drunk and they fell downstairs. I don't know what happened, but um, those guys would just raise hell when they got together. Um, that's funny.
We did a lot of stuff. Well, some stuff up here. Did Kylie ever come up to Aspen?
Yeah, he did. The house that and he did like Aspen a lot. I forgot the house that he did. Uh
Oh.
there's a house right a block off Main Street that he had worked on for years. Um maybe it was a couple blocks, and maybe it was on the river. I can't remember. I didn't work on it. Um
I'll look that up.
he was really good friends with the founder of Anderson Ranch.
Solder. Paul?
Yes.
Solder? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Huh. They're trying to turn that the whole complex out there in Woody Creek into like a nonprofit educational center. And restore the buildings and the kilns, and it's a really nice. It's completely surrounded by open space now, city and county open space. It's a really nice spot. So I was out there before COVID. So interesting.
Well, I can stay as long as people are willing to carry the conversation on, but uh, he was brilliant. I have to say he was a challenging personality. Um, he he could be very charming, but then he could be extremely volatile and demanding. I'll just go back to this, and Joanne has seen a lot more than this, but I have this one drawing that I had worked on. But Dan always liked to work with. He would prefer to hire architects in his office than landscape architects, because they would think very um, uh, precisely, and so everything that Dan did was about precision. And we you see that these big Redmond lindens are 15 feet apart. The ginkgos are 10 feet apart, and this is in the country. So he really, and I think these are lindens in here as well, and these are even closer. These are probably 12 feet apart. And so he's been, a lot of his projects get overgrown at a certain point. The places that take care of them, like Fountain Place and the Miller Garden, take these trees out and replace them when they start getting too big and woody and overgrown. So that's kind of what you had to do to have a Kiley garden, was be willing to uh, redo it every 30 years or so. And some people have been able to do that and just love the architecture of the space. Um, and then other places like in Milwaukee, where that whole garden was just ripped out around the museum. Um, yeah, they just weren't set up for that. And it's certainly not like bringing nature. And some of these a forester would look at this and say, "You've got to be crazy. This is the worst thing you can do to these trees. These trees need to be 60 feet apart if they're going to grow to maturity and magnificent specimen trees." But that really wasn't his approach and his idea at all.
And that's interesting for the air garden because the trees in the air garden are on 14-foot centers. So everything on the academy is on a 7-foot grid. So trees are on that same grid. And, but because of the altitude, they're not going to get to the full size. And so I think that it might be well balanced. And the other thing is Walter Netsch, was in charge of all the planning and designing of the academy, along with Gordon Bunshaft. And Walter really loved ginkgo trees. So he was really trying hard to convince Dan Kiley to integrate ginkgo trees into the design of the academy. But I think that the altitude and the environment's way too severe for ginkgo trees.
Yeah, I would say that's probably true. I mean, they're hardy trees. They're hardy trees, but what are they, like a zone 3 or 3 tree? I can't remember, but
No, they don't really grow well above 5,000 feet.
okay.
No, I was thinking maybe that's another reason he didn't like Colorado is our choice of plant materials out here. It's nothing like
Right.
Vermont.
Right.
And it's hard to do these very architectural planting designs with the wind and the snow load and just the really harsh growing conditions we have out here.
And the wind is a concern at the academy because where the
Yeah.
recessed trees are, like I mentioned before, we were not going to put the sod back in. We were going to actually use pea gravel. But about 2 months ago, we were up in the air garden and the wind was really whipping and it was really driving the sand on the site all over the place and sandblasting everything. So we were really concerned about pea gravel actually lifting up and sandblasting cadets and light poles and all that. So we're actually using a heavier gravel than the pea gravel.
Here's another thing that he like in this plan. These stepping stones are 12 inches wide with a 12-inch space between them, and it looks really cool, but it's like nobody has that cadence. Um, so you have to feel like you're just like taking little baby steps, and that's what he would always say. So I'm trying to get people to really relax and just take little. It's like a Zen thing, but in reality, there's just stuff that great designers oftentimes some of their things that they develop that are very precise may not be completely functional. So these are what 6 inches, yeah, 2 feet on center. It's just not it's not a natural cadence for most people, which have found is 2.5 feet center to center. But so it was kind of an odd experience. And just like you go back to the air garden piece, and Dan talk about irreverent. He would explain that the reason that he laid that out the way it is because all the cadets were always marching in formation, and he was trying to force them to have to take these right angles all the time and break down that kind of. It's still very formal movement, but it's not the one that the guards would be taking in when they were in formation.
Yeah, actually, that's one of the traditions at the academy is the grid. You can see it in the rendering with the marble bands in the plaza pavement. When when the new classes come in, they have to actually walk on the marble bands and turn 90-degree corners. And so if you get a whole line of them, of 10 of them in line, walking down and turning these 90-degree corners, it's really something to see.
Yeah, I'll bet. I
But it
bet it's-
does, the grid does force, I don't know if that was something that was originally planned by the Air Force or if it just evolved. It probably evolved early on, but it certainly fits well with the traditions at the Academy.
So, Chris and Josh, I'm going to sign off. Thanks. Really, really good presentation. Really interesting. Great question and conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Be well. Good week.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn.
Great to see you and hear your stories and learn a lot tonight. So thank you.
You're welcome. Great. Good. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's, I love it. It's easy to talk about.
Chris, so Dan did the Miller Garden and a few other projects, but with working with Harry Weiss, was he in Columbus a lot? Because I see like there's a few big projects in Columbus that he's credited, but I also find he's credited for like up to 30 other projects in Columbus, and that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time to spend in that town. And I mean, that's just a rural little far.
Yeah.
Like, did that? Did Columbus remind him of Vermont at all in terms of the agriculture and how rural it was, or what were his thoughts on what was
Well,
going on there?
Well, it was Irwin Miller, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
Dan that was probably his biggest client, maybe ever.
Yeah.
Was Irwin Miller, and I think because he did his house, and I think they had an amazing relationship. So he was a really a benefactor of Dan's. And so I think it was almost like Dan was, unless there was a really good reason for it, Dan was quite the landscape architect.
Okay. Yeah, because that was the other thing that I was reading with Irwin Miller. He had his preferred architects, but it was saying that Dan was really the only landscape architect that they ever had.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What was the ice cream shop there that all those guys used to hang out with Irwin Miller?
Zaharicos. Apparently a lot of business deals happened at the ice cream place. Well, it was it was a block away from his office. So yeah, and then the North Christian Church project, that was the first Kiley design that I ever, unless I interacted with some other one that I have no idea, but that's the first one that I distinctly remember. And I just remember driving up there because I was going to the service and driving through and just was in awe of even the landscape. And I had no idea that even was a part of the design or existed as part of that. And so that was, I almost didn't even go inside. I just wanted to walk around.
Well, you and I spent we spent hours walking through the tree bosques and stuff around the backside of the church, and
Yeah.
yeah.
And they've done some work there, and they said that the arborvitae were overgrown or were past their usable lifespan, so they've recently replaced those. I know the Miller House recently, as part of Exhibit Columbus, one of the installations included a bunch of I don't know exactly what they were, but they were a bunch of evergreens. And after the exhibit Columbus was over, all of those were taken to the Miller House to be used as replacements in the landscape um, for things that they needed to replace. Yeah, and the Miller House is just another. That is so great too. That was another place I didn't even want to. I just wanted to walk around for a few hours before even going inside.
There's down in Dallas, there's right across the street from the Dallas Museum of Art is the Nasher Sculpture Garden. And uh, it's a Peter Walker design project. So it was always confusing. Dan had a Scottish partner named Peter Walker as well, Peter Kerr Walker, and then there was Pete Walker, so Pete Walker's the landscape architect for the Nasher Sculpture Garden, and they just have a plan of replacing shrubs and hedges and trees and grass and sod pretty much on an annual basis. There's a revolving sort of a schedule for replacing plant material. And it's interesting because I guess when you are creating something that's that sculptural, everything needs to be the way it's intended to be, and you don't want it to get too big or die or whatever. And you look at this one here of the Chicago Art Institute garden here. These hawthorn trees are those trees are probably close to 60 years old. And it's just amazing that they're still performing as well as they are. And, I think what's great about them is they create that canopy. And so I've always thought of Dan's work as defining floor, wall, and ceiling. And, but he just uses landscape materials to do that, as similar to the way you would create a building. And so he's just really taken that concept, and most of his gardens in particular, that's what he's doing.
Chris, what's become of his farm now?
So let's see, one of the boys owns a good portion of it. The farmhouse was sold. There was eight children, so they came up with a plan of how to dispose of the property because everybody dispersed. And two of the sons bought a good portion of it, the hilltop. So Dan, his wife used to always go out and build these little shacks in the woods that she would go out and read and take a nap and do whatever. She'd have a place to go. They have 400 acres, and she would wander out and find these spaces, and then she would essentially build them by herself and get one of the boys to help her a bit. So she had a couple of these different destinations, and then Dan decided that he had to have one. So he, ha- you know, built one that was more sophisticated, and then at a certain point, they decided they really didn't want to live in the big house that burned down after they died, but they started creating this series of little cabins up what they call Mountain Village, and that still exists. And there's three structures up there. And Dan started building these crazy walkways without railings, like 12 feet off the ground, that would move through the trees. And he built them more as sculpture than as a walkway, because nobody would ever in their right mind walk out on those things. But he was always building something, and ripping stuff down and building stuff. And so he was just constant.
How many buildings did he ever do? Like,
As an architect, well, he did get licensed as an architect in Vermont. One of my best friends lives in a house that he designed. It was, they were all flat roofed, very inexpensively built. Um, he, at one point, he was a partner with an architect in Vermont, and that didn't last very long. But I would say he probably built about 12 buildings, maybe more, maybe a little more in Vermont. And yeah, my friend who's an architect bought one of the houses that he designed, and he's completely renovated it. And it's a wonderful house. So it's yeah.
Wonder what the transition between just going towards landscape. Wonder how that happened. Or
Well, I
why.
think he was a landscape designer first, and then there weren't many strict registration laws, and so Vermont is a pretty small state, pretty poor state, and I think he started doing that partially to stay busy, and also he did love architecture, so he wasn't a great architect, but he had a good sense of proportion. And so, okay, well, thank you very much. This has been really fun.
Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, I mean,
Couple of hours.
yeah, absolutely wonderful talk. I mean, Dan, yeah, I get very excited about his work. Just the approach to it. It's the whole thing. I get very excited about his work, and I think it's a great honor that and privilege that you and I get to do something together, and I kind of feel like I get to touch Dan's work here.
Yeah, I've been enjoying working with you too, because it's bringing back all these memories of working with these great modernist architects, and the rigor that they bring to their work was really impressive, and it was amazing to see how hard everybody would work to get the smallest detail to work out. And it wasn't just like, oh, we're out of budget, we can't do this anymore. And it was like, no, this has to be right. And it would take a long time to get it right.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
you.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Great presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.